And as promised, we're going to return here for the last segment of the show. Mike Cagley and Mason Williams, who's the senior writer from the Hoosier.com. So please go ahead and check his stuff out. Fantastic coverage of the Indiana Hoosiers. I know they're one of the teams that Illini fans love to hate, but you want to be up to date with our opponent. That's where you need to go.
Hey, real quick,
Yep.
what's your take on that? Is it a rivalry, Indiana, Illinois? I know it was a big point during basketball season last year.
It is in basketball. I think the Indiana fans, I'll be real honest with you, be real brutal with you. Indiana fans think it's 1987. They're not a blue blood anymore. They used to be when I was a young man. I'm 56 now. When I was a young man, Bobby Knight was there.
Yeah.
Up until about like 93 or something. Indiana was up there with, UCLA and North Carolina. Duke was ascending to that status. And, but you have to remember Bob Knight, did everything he could to get Lou Henson put on probation because he did not like, you could take a look at the 80s when Illinois took over having the best defense in the league.
Yeah.
Bob Knight didn't like that. He did not like that at all. And of course, you had the Flying Illini, and Illinois got put on probation with the Bruce Pearl spliced tape, and the first line of the NCAA, infraction notice was, although there's no proof of any of the infractions, the number of the infractions, the number of accusations leads us to do the lack of institutional control. Something like that nowadays would just result in a lawsuit that the NCAA would lose, very similar to what happened at Kansas, and nothing would happen. As somebody who was old enough to know a lot of those Illini basketball players, there was a lot of stuff in place, and I paid for beer for people who, if they were making as much money as the rest of the Big Ten thought, they should have been paying for my beer.
Right.
But it is what it is. But Illinois and Indiana in basketball, I think that's a rivalry. Indiana fans have some reason to not like it, and I think a lot of that goes with the end of the Weber era and the John Gross era. Illinois wasn't very good, but if you wake up and smell the coffee, there's a few years Indiana had some pretty lean years as well. I do think in the Big Ten, you've got Illinois, Michigan State, Indiana, Michigan State, Illinois, and those two, and those two teams. I think that those triumvirate are probably the big three in the Big Ten for basketball.
Yeah. But I would say I grew up, I was born in 2001. So my spectrum of Indiana basketball is very different than a lot of the people that I'm writing to, a lot of the people that are tuning in religiously to the program. So I'm always curious to get a take on it from different generations of it, because I know what I grew up with and what some of the people that are discussing it have grown up with. So I'm always curious on that. So I appreciate the insight more than anything.
What's your feeling?
I would agree with you that in basketball, it's definitely contentious. And even if Indiana fans don't like to say it's a rivalry, the way that they behave and the way that they speak to one another online or in person, whatever, it's a rivalry. Whether it's not the most contentious rivalry by any means, when you're looking at the likes of an Indiana Purdue or something along those lines, but it's not to that level, but it doesn't have to be considered a rival. You know what I mean? So I would say that there's kind of a sense where Indiana fans are proud to be like, yeah, we beat Illinois, and so if you're more proud of that one, then why would you not just admit, like, yeah, it's a rivalry, we like to beat them, or we don't like to lose to them, either way. So I would say that I've grown up in a time where I feel like it's contentious, and maybe that's because of it being more readily available to see online or whatever. But I'm always just curious of how it's evolved over generations, because you see like the Eric Gordon shove clip or something like that. Like that's the clip, that's the basis of it that I've grown up around. And and the year when Indiana was number 1 in the country and they go and lose at Illinois.
Yeah,
And
Tyler Griffey's layup. Yeah.
right, so that's the basis of knowledge that I have around it, that because that's what I grew up with. So yeah, I would assume it's a rivalry. Football wise, I don't think it's anything more than
Nobody cares. They both are at the
nobody
bottom.
cares.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think it's anything further than the stadiums being named the same, right? And because they're not in the same division, anything like that. So, but basketball wise, I would say, yeah, it's at least it's not your everyday matchup like, oh, they play Illinois on Wednesday night. Like, oh no, Indiana, Illinois on Wednesday night. Like that should be a good game. It's always a good game. So I would assume just in the most basic sense, yes, it's a rivalry.
Yeah, we go back to, you go back to the 70s and 80s, and Henson and Bobby Knight had some blowouts. I mean, those guys went at each other hard, and you had the opposite. Henson would rarely swear,
Hmm.
and you had Bobby Knight, who was the total opposite.
The
And
sailor. So
yep, exactly. And so there were, contrasting styles. And then you go back to the game when Nick Anderson hit the 3-pointer to win the game at the very end. Was a huge game that stuck in Bobby's craw. And those guys, they went back and forth. I mean, every game was bitterly contested, and the two teams generally gave each other their best games. So
right.
if you had tickets to one of those games, it was it was fantastic entertainment. So and then obviously in the modern era, you go after the third year of Weber, Illinois goes into a black hole, and then it took Underwood 2 years to flush the stuff out of the system because, again, Underwood got here right before the transfer portal came into
Right.
place, and you
Yeah.
can see how he uses the portal. If the transfer portal had been to place when he got here, he would have turned it around Illinois in about a season.
Right.
But he had to flush through, a roster of the John Gross and some of that miasma of mediocrity that was kind of there. And now he has to win in the postseason. And as a old guy, that's the exact same thing that Lou Henson had to go through.
Yeah.
He had to bring Illinois back, and and it took a while to win in the tourney. And
Hmm.
he had to listen to, oh, he can't win in the tourney before he got that done. And Underwood is going through the same thing. So we're hoping that this is the year. And I probably should have mentioned Purdue, the masters of the grab and hold. That I don't know why they don't, because Painter's a fantastic coach. I
Right.
don't know why he hasn't figured out that if I teach him to grab and hold all year, it doesn't get called in the Big Ten because who knows why. And then I get into the tournament and the grab and hold gets called and we lose in the first round.
To the
Maybe,
16s and the 15s and
yeah,
everything.
maybe
The
we
double
stop.
digits.
Yeah, maybe we stop grabbing and holding all year so that we're ready for the tournament.
Yeah.
But and again, Matt Painter, could outcoach me blindfolded, tied up, in the trunk of a car. So there's no, but it just seems shocking to me that a guy with his talent level hasn't thought like, hey, maybe we coach something that's sustainable in the tournament. But
Yeah, going back to the point about the IU fan base specifically, I think that's where a lot of the allure and a lot of the affection from a guy like Mike Woodson comes from, right? Being an Indiana player, played under Bob Knight. Indiana fans loved Bob Knight for better or for worse, for whatever he was, everything that came with him, he was Indiana's guy. So, and obviously it's been an emotional time with him passing just recently around the program and everything. But having a guy like Woodson at the helm, I think Indiana fans have really attached themselves to him because he's the guy that's Indiana was nowhere near the point that Tom Crean took over with when he took over from Archie Miller, but Archie was never really an Indiana guy. He was maybe the right guy for the job when he was hired, but then afterwards it just never panned out. So with him now out of the fold and Indiana back with Woodson and this immediate success Woodson has had in kind of laying his own base layer and now starting to build off of it. Now it's getting back to him where it's like, okay, now what's he going to do next? Now he's got this year is his first real test because he's got no Trace Jackson Davis. He's got no Race Thompson. He's got no program stalwarts really outside of Xavier Johnson, who's really only come in since him. So, and I know we're not talking basketball here, but
Well,
still,
we are, which is fun. Who cares? It's
right.
Basketball season's about to start, so that's fine.
So I would assume that's where some of it comes from too. Now having Woodson on staff and going back to maybe some of those older matchups between Indiana and Illinois when Woodson was a player, some of that kind of stuff, it all gets rekindled. But he's a good guy for a fan base that is used to having all their success 30 years ago. So and kind of being the guy that they can hopefully point them to establish a new era of success for Indiana. But I think that's where part of that comes from too.
Yeah, but I'm not an Indiana basketball fan, but when Illinois and Indiana are both good, the Big Ten's much more fun to watch.
Oh, yes,
and
absolutely.
If you throw in, if you can throw in a healthy Michigan and a healthy Michigan State, it turns into exciting basketball. I just hope that the Big Ten figures out that you've got to start officiating the games in
like
a
it's
fashion.
Called March.
Yes, you don't need the WWE stuff because then your teams go in and they try that in the tournament. It doesn't work. And you've already, you're 10 minutes into the first half of your game, your first game in the tournament, and the other team's already in the double bonus. And you go into halftime down, 14 points and then you got to try to play a whole different style of defense with the other team with a nice, head start on you.
Well, you're playing so slow, right? Because that's the pace of the game too in the conference, and then you're getting run around by ACC teams and SEC teams that have been running and gunning all season long. So I know Indiana really struggled last year to keep up with Miami's speed in the conference or in the tournament. And obviously, Miami ended up going up to all the way to the Final Four, but you look at that as like Miami had speed all over the court. They could have ran circles around most of the Indiana guards, especially with Xavier Johnson out. And Johnson, the quickest guard Indiana has, is an ACC guy from Pitt. So, that's where I think a lot of it comes from too. You play such a slowed down brand of basketball, tackle basketball almost, where no fouls are called. And then you get to the tournament where not only is the whistle much more strict and much more conducive of what actual basketball is, but it's much quicker, and all of a sudden you've got 9 Big Ten teams and none of them are in the Elite Eight as it was a couple of years ago or something like that. So you've got no real shot at the title, and that's how you end up with Michigan State before I was born in 2000 being the last NCAA title. So that's where that comes from too, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. And if I had $5 for every time I talked to a recruit at an EYBL function where they explained to me how an SEC or an ACC or a Pac-12 coach talked about, do you want to play where you can get punched, kicked, elbowed, or do you want to play where you can show your skills to the guys in the NBA so they can see how good you are? It's become a recruiting pitch for coaches that you're going to get reffed like that. And, do you really want some guy? And then, Io getting punched in the nose was something that was used by SEC coaches numerous times against Big Ten schools. You want to go there and get punched in the face? They didn't even call a foul. They had to stop the game, call a timeout to get anything called, and these kids aren't dumb, they're like, I think I would rather score 30 points and not have to worry about getting beat up,
Yeah.
So I tell you what, we will take a break, folks, and then we will talk defense because we had our basketball interlude because we're excited. Illinois starts on Monday night. Indiana starts on Tuesday night, and it's the greatest month of the year. November means that we have a boatload of basketball games and a boatload of football games to cover. We'll be right back in a minute.